because you were virtuous yesterday, it does not give you some sort of like staying power that you're going to be a virtuous person today.
When I was in university and I was starting to apply for jobs, for work terms, there's a kind of this ongoing joke that happened because when you go through a list of interview questions, one of the questions is, what's your weakness or what's your biggest weakness, right? And really what the interviewer is looking for there is like a little bit of humility. Like, what's your weakness and are you working on it? And one of the kind of running jokes on that was, well, I know what I'm going to say for that. I'll just tell them I'm a perfectionist. And then everyone would laugh, right? And then he goes, no, I'll explain it. Like I get so focused on one thing and I can't move on to the other thing because I want it to be perfect. And for some people, that's a right answer. Like I'm a perfectionist and that's a real problem. For most people, that's like a humble brag and they can't, so it was always kind of funny to talk about that. But you mentioned to me the last time we spoke on imperfectionism. And it's something that kind of ties in with a lot of the topics you and I talk about, but I think you've been digging into it a lot more lately in the imperfectionist world, which I didn't know existed. So to kick it off, man, what's imperfectionism?
Yeah, I don't know. Now that you asked it like that, I'm not sure. um, but it depends how you define things and how you think about things. I think there's so much connection and so many synonyms between things, but it's maybe just being human. I think if we were to ask anybody, are you perfect? No. Are you ever going to be? No. But yet we operate in some sort of way where we're not like fully accepting of that. And for some reason it sounds a little on the weak sauce side of things. To say I'm embracing imperfectionism. But as you know, and maybe some of the listeners know as well, there's a lot of stuff in Stoic writings emphasizing this point. Like Marcus Aurelius writing to himself, hey, don't go around expecting Plato's Republic, this perfect society, and etc. In Seneca, obviously, there's lots about his own imperfections. There's lots about this idea of the sage being unbelievably rare, and maybe the sage comes as often as the phoenix, according to lore, like maybe once every 500 years. So this thing of just coming to the realization that, well, I'm not a sage. I'm not perfectly rational. I'm not perfectly anything. Um, I think there's some sort of wisdom. There's some sort of practical wisdom that is really important. Maybe it connects with impermanence and just so many other things.
So where do you think like this kind of bothers people throughout their day? Like you mentioned where there's a bit of a struggle there in terms of like us struggling with our lack of perfection or imperfectness, however you want to say it. So like in kind of like daily life, where does that kind of show itself?
Well, one, it might show itself in the way of accepting ourselves. Like we've spoke sometimes, maybe you'd call it like the darker sides of our nature, which can be difficult, like the shadow stuff that Jung would talk about. So if I have some sort of notion that I need to be the sage, or I need to, just some sort of rigidness around the good life, I wonder, how open am I to like spotting the missteps in my philosophy of life? How open am I? How much And I mean, there's so many different words in the way of skepticism, humility, not knowing, this type of stuff, which are seen as virtues. But it's also kind of connected in a way, depending how you look at it, with imperfectionism, as it's like mortality, even in general. There's this painting that I really like for some reason. It's by Paul Gauguin, and it's like a half finished painting. It's like he did the sketch and stuff like that, and then got about halfway through, and it's just that's it. The other half is just like not done. And I used it for a post I probably sent out like a while back, the unfinished life. That was just like maybe the artist just abandoned it for something more important. But maybe it's like he thought he'd have more time and he just died and wasn't able to finish this painting. And it's a half finished painting that is basically like released out to, the public is in the public domain and stuff like that. But just from a mortality standpoint, like the end of all of our lives, whenever that may be, there's going to be some sort of to-do list that is unfinished. There's going to be some sort of meaningful, worthwhile task that will not be done. Maybe it's a half-finished painting. Maybe it's, this project or that project. Maybe it's on that unfinished list is maybe rekindling a relationship with a son or daughter or, you know, parent or loved one, wherever it may be. And it's like this thing of accepting that. And it's like, hey, I'm mortal. At some point in time, there's going to be things that are unfinished. What do I want to be unfinished? What am I okay with having on this, non-checked off to-do list? And I think it connects with that as well, which is pretty central, I think, to the human nature thing. What it means to be human.
Yeah, that unfinished painting idea is pretty fascinating to me. Because you're right. I mean, we're all going to leave something unfinished, and in some sense, it's a sad thing, right? Because there's things that we're going to start that we're never going to finish because of our mortal limitations. But then, like on the other end, in terms of, I guess, the bigger picture of things, the whole cosmos idea is like this is something that, if I've done my part correctly, it can be handed off to whoever, or perhaps nobody. Like in the painting example, nobody really picked that painting up and finished it. But you will see sometimes where an author dies in the middle of writing a series, where another author will pick it up after the original author has died and finished it. And so there's something of beauty in that too. I just recognize, again, to get back to like that humility thing of like, okay, yeah, there's going to be things that are unfinished by me, but maybe they're not going to be unfinished. Maybe these things are going to keep going on in a different spirit, so to speak. But yeah, what an interesting idea about the whole like feeding that back into mortality. Because if you think about like, the whole idea of like why we're imperfect to begin with, it really all stems from us being vulnerable. Really, like we're very vulnerable beings. I mean, we cut easy, we bruise easy, and we die pretty easy also, right? We have pretty short lives in the grand scheme of things. So it's a pretty cool idea. How do you think about this in terms of like other people? So there's like the whole imperfectionist thing of oneself, but then there's also, getting bothered by the imperfections of other people, by the faults of other people. We seem to really easily write people off for things that we've probably said or done. Like, have you ever, like, someone says something rude to you and you kind of get upset about it and you just kind of write them off in your head? And then, like, if you really think, like, you were probably just as rude to someone yesterday or a week ago or whatever. So yeah, how do you think about that, like, in relationship to other people?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, and before like touching on that, I do just want to say one thing in the way of language, like perfection, imperfection. We're using those words to describe something, but then it's like we're putting some sort of meaning behind it. So, like, say a human being that makes mistakes, we might use imperfection or committing vices as some sort of pejorative. But if you think about, like, say something basic like a car or something. So, like a car, routine maintenance, oil changes, like new tires, it doesn't last forever. You can have like standard mechanical breakdowns and stuff like that once you get, so many miles and things like that. Does that mean it's imperfect? We wouldn't think of something like that as like it's imperfect. It's just its nature. It's just how it is. It's what it means to be a vehicle. There's certain requirements. There's certain needs. There's certain standard things. And like sometimes it's helpful. I think just from and maybe through some of these conversations, we'll probably chat about, like we do often, is a philosophy of life. And then like one portion of a philosophy of life is maybe loosely like metaphysics or ontological questions, like in terms of existence. What does it mean to be human? And it's like the nature and some of that. It's like we might use words to describe it, but it still just doesn't mean anything. You could say perfectly imperfect, and who's to say that a particular sage is, fully enlightened and some, things like that. People that we look back at history as super wise people like Marcus Aurelius, the Stoics, and things like that. They weren't perfect. They knew firsthand, but it doesn't mean that they weren't really wise and had the capacity for the good life. But in reference to the other people thing, I think that connects with it with that. It's like, we get all sorts of maybe upset or hurt or offended by other people just being human. And like, should we? And in terms of rude comments, say someone gives a rude comment and they're very direct about something and we label it as rude, maybe it was really good feedback for us. Maybe it was like we were the ones that were actually doing something that was not so nice. And it was actually kind of a virtuous thing for this person to let us know very directly, if we were open to hear that. So it's just, I think it's interesting to maybe think about it like that. But the question that you ask, it connects with everything in terms of relationships with your spouse, your kids, the people you work with. I mean, it's just it's everything.
Now, in terms of how that works around the ego, I want to poke your brain about this because, like, what I find happening is, let's say you have things that you pride yourself on, right? Your strengths as an individual, and I think in some sense we can tie our self confidence and our self worth to our strengths. Like if you're really good with numbers and you're in finance, and you're really good at that particular job, in some sense you tie your worth to that. And then what can happen is if you make a mistake, maybe a big one, and then you have someone that comes in and will kind of, maybe your boss, maybe they reprimand you for that a little bit, or maybe you just maybe you just see your own mistake, right? And then something interesting happens where you have a hit to your ego, and you kind of like, your shoulders kind of go down a little bit. You walk around a little bit less confident for a little while. And so in a sense, your ego is damaged and your self-confidence is damaged. But in some kind of paradoxical, weird way, if you can kind of just, like, what's destroying your confidence there? It's you thinking to yourself, okay, I'm not very good at that, right? But if you kind of answer that with, well, of course I'm not going to be perfect at this all the time. Like, of course I'm bad at math sometimes. Of course. Recognizing and accepting that seems to give your ego back and your confidence back. And I mean ego in like a, not necessarily like a big ego, or I just mean like kind of your sense of self-worth. Like, it's kind of paradoxical in the sense that for you to walk around more confidently, you have to be willing to say, well, of course I'm an idiot sometimes. Like, but it's very, very strange.
Yeah, it is. It is, and sometimes I think about some of that stuff in the way of just like seeing clearly of whatever it may be, a particular event, response, and in between that event and response is some sort of judgment, some sort of sense making that is happening. And like you say, you kind of unraveled it a little bit in terms of the language that I would use in in the way of that judgment or the sense making is like, well, is that rational? Does that make any sense? Like, do I who said I needed to be perfect? A lot of these things we already know that it's and because it's weird. There's certain things in the way of like perfection. There's certain things where there's like a standard. Say there's a in the way of archery, there is a bullseye. There is a perfect shot. But in the way of things that you're into, strength training, like what is the perfect squat? Like what amount is that? It's not the same. There isn't a perfection there. There isn't an exact bullseye. You might have a PR, whatever it may be your particular best. But what does that mean? If you beat your PR, did you achieve some sort of perfection? I would say no, because that's not how that particular domain, that particular practice works. There isn't a perfect thing. It's more of a perennial path type of stuff. So it's also worth in the way of the unraveling the judgment of knowing like what it is. Sometimes it's just the subjective opinion of whatever it may be, a boss, etc. Not that there's not some sort of value in that, but it's also like, well, is this something where there's a clear standard, or is there more uncertainty and nuance in this particular thing?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I would say like another thing to think about in terms of this, because what we're talking about is like a kind of like a worldly strength, and just to kind of bring it back to the Stoic lens of like what's actually important, which is your character. Like an interesting thing to keep in mind when you're doing this, and it feeds back into the humility thing and also the imperfection thing, is that like any strength you have, worldly strength, outside of the virtues, it can really be taken away in no time at all. Right?
Yeah,
Like
an
I
instant.
could leave the gym just finishing a squat workout, go check my mail, and a car hits me and my legs are broken and I can never squat again. And does that mean that I'm no longer me? Does that mean that I no longer have value? Does that mean that I no longer have strength? Right? Well, of course not. So I think this whole idea of us having this really high standard of perfection, the highest standard of perfection, we're also kind of lying to ourselves because we can't maintain that. Even if we had it for a very brief moment in time, we're never going to be able to maintain it. And it all feeds back to what you brought up earlier, which is mortality.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know. And maybe I'm wrong in the assumption a little bit that there is tons of use for some sort of imperfectionist mindset. I'm obviously just speaking for me personally, like experientially. It's like there's some sort of use. Um, but obviously that may not be the case for everybody. Maybe like totally like common knowledge that it's like, well, yeah, of course. Um, but I do think in the way of just like a mindfulness thing, like a mindfulness practice of how do we like let go of the previous moment and just kind of be here. I used to read a lot of the popular like coaching books, popular like football coaches and basketball coaches, and one of the things that come up, they try to instill in players is like, how do you have a mindset of 4 seconds? Because each play typically lasts about 4 seconds, and it's like 4 seconds, okay, done, and it's like wiped clean, new in the way of football. And like there's a little bit of that. It's like regardless of whatever it was, it's a new play. It's a new day. It's a new moment. And like you're talking about in terms of the example, like, yeah, you have your best squat of your life, and then, you get injured 10 minutes later, like trying to get to your car. Yeah, it's in like the uncertainty, the impermanent nature of not only our lives, but all sorts of things like careers, relationships, projects, whatever like gives way to life is going to also like go away. It's going to pass. Like this too shall pass again and again. And you could say that, hey, that's not like under the umbrella of imperfectionism or anything like that. But I tend to think it is. It's connected in some sort of way because we have a desire for permanence. We have a desire for things to last, and they don't. Like that's just the way life in the world works. And how do we fully embrace that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, depending on like where you are in your philosophical journey, I think people can find themselves projecting out into the future and really hoping and desiring for that perfection of life. Like if you're someone who is, if you would describe yourself as a relatively happy person, like you probably got some things together, right? You probably got some decent relationships and some meaningful work and so on. Um, but a lot of people are in like hell, right? A lot of people are in hell.
Yeah.
And I think this is why, because I've been thinking about this song Fast Car by Tracy Chapman. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's a very, very great and popular song. But I've
Yeah.
been thinking about why that resonates with so many people. And like the whole song is about that moment. You got someone who's just hating their life. They're in this terrible situation. And then there's this moment where they're driving a fast car where they actually feel like, oh, okay, I'm actually somebody. I'm actually happy right now. And it's a very brief moment in time. But the whole song is her struggling through her terrible life, reflecting back on this one moment of like, okay, that is possible. And as much as I agree that we can make our lives better and we can move forward, we can crawl our way out of hell over time. I think the perception that we're going to be driving that fast car forever, I think it's just a delusion. And so I think it's helpful, no matter where you are in your journey, it's helpful to know that as early as possible. It's like, can you make your life better? Absolutely. Can you feel better? Absolutely. Can you feel the best you've ever felt all of the time? No. It just doesn't exist. Even fast cars run out of gas.
Yeah. Um the thing of like the good life, like maybe something we're striving for, we have an intention to move closer to, which I imagine many people listening to your podcast are in that space. It You're absolutely right. It doesn't mean that there's not like the current state of a miserable life or, just immense challenges and stuff. Um the song you mentioned reminds me of one that I've heard recently. It's I think it's called Who I Was, but it's the line in it is like, who I am is not who I was. And it's coming from a like a Christian context, but I think it applies outside of that as well. You think of the Heraclitus, popular quote that many have heard, nobody steps in the river, same river twice. Like, who I am is not who I was. And maybe it's difficult to say it's not who I was yesterday, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves, like who I am is, not who I was 6 months ago or a year ago. I've like gained particular tools and skills and had hardships that have taught me difficult lessons that I didn't want to experience, but I did. And who I am is not who I was. And like now with that in the lens, making decisions forward, embracing the fact that like perfection's not needed. The good life is not synonymous with a perfect life. How do you start making decisions based on like who you are right now? Using like the wisdom that you've gained and making some sound decisions. Um I think it's easier said than done. If we can remember, it's something we can kind of tap into and maybe we write down a Heraclitus quote and we kind of, are mindful and pick up these things, but it's easy, especially if we're not like intentional and thoughtful about how we want to live and things like that, that, we're making decisions based on like the mindset that we had when we were 12 or something. It's like we're making decisions in the present moment as like a less wise version of ourselves. It's like we have some inner wisdom that we've all gained along the way, especially if it's been a bit of a difficult road. Sometimes those difficult roads are like pretty littered with practical wisdom that we pick up along the way if we can remember to use it.
Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, that the importance of challenges, right? And how obviously through that is how you grow your character. And then the people that don't have those challenges for whatever reason, people that maybe come from like really wealthy families and they don't have to work, they've never had to worry about money, they have their own struggles to deal with. But compared to, say, someone who is like living in strict poverty and is struggling to get meals on the table for their kids, they have a different level of growth and development and humility. And it really begs the question on this whole thing of, like, I was listening to someone on Modern Wisdom the other day, and they were talking about how people who start off in a bad situation in life, and they're able to grow their way out of it and pull their way out of it over the course of their life, they always have a reference point of somewhere that was a lot worse than where they are. Whereas people who are born into a relatively easy life, they don't have that reference point. Their reference point is zero where they are, and they're only looking above, and so it becomes a very challenging thing for them to be happy, which is so, like, nobody would ever think that, right? Like, if you're that person in poverty at 12 years old and you're looking at your neighbor who has a beautiful house and a great family and they never have to struggle, they always have food on the table, your head would inherently label that good and the situation I am in bad. But then when you zoom out over the course of your life, it's just so funny how obviously, through Stoicism, you kind of look at things and you go, okay, well, is that really good? And it's like, of course it's not. Of course it's not, because it's about character, and character is developed through hardship. So very, very strange and counterintuitive idea. And another thing I wanted to poke your brain about, I've heard Theo Vaughn and Peterson talk, and they were talking about feeling proud of oneself. And people have different opinions on this, right? Because if you were to ask, like, what seems to be the notion today is if someone says, "Are you proud of yourself?" People say you should be. You should be proud of your accomplishments. I think, at least from my experience, I never feel really proud of myself. And in fact, I feel weird when people compliment me. And some people would look at that and say, well, that's a bad thing. I'm not convinced it is. I think, like, if you're getting compliments all the time and you're just kind of building up your ego into this thing where you're feeling proud of yourself all the time, it's like, I'm not sure if that's the healthiest emotion, but I'm not really sure. So what do you think of this idea of feeling proud of oneself?
Let me ask you a question, just out of curiosity, and also I think it connects a little bit with the topic. Um, so you've done 300 plus episodes in terms of this podcast. Lots of thought, effort, writing, recording stuff over, at least the last few years. When you think about like that project, that work, whatever it may be, um, like, are you proud of it? Are you glad that you did it or no?
I'm definitely not proud of it.
Okay. Are you
I don't
happy?
have.
Like, would you do it again?
Yeah.
Do you think it was a worthwhile pursuit?
Yes, absolutely.
And then, like, in terms of proud, I guess it depends on the definition that you would use for it. I think it's a little bit different in the way of like being proud of oneself, because then you get into like, well, what does that even mean? And what do you mean by proud of yourself? Um, but I think you can be like proud of a particular like project or endeavor. Like, I think it would be completely. I think it's kind of a synonym in the way of, you know what? I'm glad I did this. This is like a worthwhile pursuit. I invested a few years into my own character development. Listeners have probably gained some practical wisdom. Maybe it's helped the lives of others. I'm proud of that, or I'm happy that I was in the position and did this. Um, and I think that's it. Just like, I also think, to go the other side of it, hey, we our conversations always tend to go to some of the darker sides of things that I'm getting ready to take us there. Um, but in the way of like the 180 of that, where it's like, you know what? I am not proud of this particular behavior, on my end. And it's like someone feels maybe shame about a particular thing that they did. And I think that's normal. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you should feel good about some of the worthwhile, virtuous endeavors. And sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but even the intention, you go into something with the intention of doing something good. And it's like, yeah, that's awesome. Good. And then vice versa. It's like, yeah, if we do something horrible, it's a pretty natural thing for us to. I don't think we should indefinitely, feel shame and guilt over things. We have to learn how to forgive ourselves and realize that we're not sages and we're imperfect and stuff. But it's pretty natural to feel horrible about some of the things if you do a horrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. You can look at it through different lights too, because I'm sure you along with me, because you've been podcasting just as long or longer. I can't remember who started first, but it was around the same time. But I get people that come to me every now and then, and like new listeners to the show, and there's a part of me that's kind of like, oh, gee, like you're going back to the roots where I had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. You're going to start from there. So now it's interesting, right? Because you think, is is it better for people to kind of hear your starting point and then maybe as you kind of develop and get deeper into your knowledge, they kind of follow you along with that. And I've kind of decided, listen, I mean, that's all out there, so I'm just going to leave it out there. But I guess my point with that is that as equal as you can look back at things and feel pride, you can, I think, as equally look back and see things that you're kind of like, ooh, like what a, what a loser, right? So, and then again, it gets back to the whole imperfectionist thing. It's like, well, of course you're a loser, man. Like, what were you expecting anything different? Like you're a human being, right? And I guess it's that tension and it's that dichotomy of as equally as I can excel at things and do well, I can just as equally, sometimes regarding the same action, be conceived in a completely the opposite direction. Like you could look at something and be like, okay, wow, like yes, I guess I can feel a bit of pride about that, but there's also parts of that where it's like maybe those aren't so prideful moments or good moments.
Yeah. Yeah, and being proud, it's not something I typically think about. I wouldn't say I put a ton of thought into, the meaning of that. I tend to think more in the way of gratitude. Like, am I grateful that, I was able to do that? Am I grateful that I, dedicated time to go on a 5-mile run? Yeah, I'm glad that I did that. And I wouldn't say it so much connects with, and again, it just depends how you define and think about things as being proud, because I also think it's important in some way to realize that we're not what we do. So it's like you can easily get into this thing. It's like, we are the good things that we do. We can think, I don't say skillfully think this, but we can kind of get attached to our actions and thoughts in terms of especially like the good things. And it's like, yeah, we're not that. We're not what we do. Like those are impermanent. It's just like, um, I probably say this too often, but in the way of a virtuous life, like because you were virtuous yesterday, it does not give you some sort of like staying power that you're going to be a virtuous person today. That's just not how it is. We have all of these things, and sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that. Um, and I think it's important to recognize that. But in the way of mistakes and like cringe moments, like you go listen to the, first couple episodes and stuff like that are like poorly edited, and who knows what. Mine are still poorly edited today, but um, there's something I sent out this morning in it was some writing from the Chinese philosopher, or no, excuse me, the Japanese philosopher Dogen, who created a school of Zen in Japan. And he talks about, it gets a bit abstract, but I think it connects, and I think it's worthy to think about in the way of being time. So he uses the analogy of, say, your archery. You pick up archery and you're just like missing the target like over and over and over. And then you become better and you hit the target. So it's like that one hit is connected to all the misses. Like they're not separate in the way of that. So it's like whether it's podcasting or public speaking or being a parent or spouse, the cringeworthy moments, the intention and the effort to live the good life, yeah, it also comes with the mistakes, like the the stumbles along the way. Like that's part of it. It's one thing. You don't get to the hitting the target, hitting the bullseye without the misses. Yeah, it's just not how things work. And obviously he gets pretty in depth with it in some of the Zen writing stuff. It does get in depth in the way of this time stuff. Same thing with the existentialists, where they talk about being and time, being one thing and stuff like that. But there's, I think, something important in that as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that to be a master, you first have to be willing to be a fool. You have to start from a very humble place. And that's true with anything in any walk of life. I think one of the biggest mistakes adults make is that they're afraid to go back into that fool zone, and because you spend your whole life working at a particular thing, normally you feed off your strengths or whatever career you end up going into. And it's kind of a strange thing where we feel all this confidence, but it's because we're doing things that we've been doing for like 20, 30 years. Whereas if you think like what is like the maximum level of confidence? Like what is pure confidence? It's being able to go into something that you're uncomfortable with, that you're not good at, and not attach your self-worth to the value that you're providing on this other thing. Like to be able to foolhardily go into something and be a fool again. Like that's confidence. It's not confident. They're both confidence, but confidence isn't just feeling good about the things that you're really good at. And so, yeah, of course, you have to be a fool before you have a master. I like what you mentioned there about how we're not our actions, and how, a lot of times, like we're on a particular road in life and then we stop for whatever reason. And I'll give you a very great example that a lot of people can relate to. If you're like into the gym, if you're like one of these gym rats, gym junkies, you'll always have this guy, this probably an older fella, maybe not though, that's out of shape, and they come up to you and they're like, "Oh yeah, you go to the gym? Yeah, I used to go. Like when I was 14, I went, and I used to go for like 10 years, and yeah, I competed a little bit." And it's like, okay, well, when's the last time you were there? It's like, oh, it's like I haven't lifted a weight in like 10 years, and there's this weird dynamic there, right? Because you have this probably like a younger person who's really into it, and they look good and they're in shape, and they're so into this thing that they can't even imagine not leaving it. And then they're looking at someone who used to be that person that no longer is. But I guess like in anything that you're attaching your identity to, I think it's very helpful to know, to your point, and accept that you can become that person that's talking to younger people saying, "Oh yeah, I used to go to the gym. Like that used to be my thing," right? And just kind of take that with humility, because I mean people do different things for different reasons, but it's a very useful thing to know that what you are right now, and how you're living your life, the actions that you're doing on a daily basis, the hobbies that you're into, really they're not you. They're not really you. Like these are just things that you're doing and that you're developing your character through. They're catalysts for character, but they're not you. And you can tell that pretty simply because there's people that were exactly like you probably when they were young that no longer are.
Yeah, I'm curious, your perspective of how you deal with this, but I think this is an example where perfectionism comes in, even though we may not spot it. Like, say this particular person, like, oh, I used to 10, 20 years ago, but now maybe they don't, because they have in their mind that going to the gym is a thing where you go 4 or 5 days a week and you do meal prep and all sorts of whatever it may be stuff. Um, and they may not have time for that. They've got like a job that's super busy and also like kids and all sorts of responsibilities, and there just isn't time. So they don't go. But why can't we go 1 or 2 days a week, and just do what you can? Even though it's not ideal, it's not maybe even something where you're gonna get tons of like gains and things like that. It might just be like a maintenance thing of just like for your own well-being and health. And you could apply that in the way of like books, whatever it may be. Oh, it's like, I don't have time to read this and that. But well, what about an hour a week? What about you schedule on some sort of thing and you block off an hour on Sundays to read? Why is that not good enough? That, but we have these sort of like, I think, visions and ways that it's like supposed to be done. It's like, well, if I'm going to start this new book, it needs to be every day. I need to finish it in 3 or 4 weeks. And I think some of this stuff applies to like all sorts of things. And then when you get more moving pieces in this like complex um, life thing, how do we still just like, we'll just do what you can? Like, do you think this is important? Do you think this is worthwhile? Cool. Like, how do you do that? Like, you're a busy guy. You're doing all sorts of stuff. Like, how do you remember that? I mean, is that something you deal with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's hard, right? Because like if you were to write down like your perfect day, obviously this depends on the person, but there's probably going to be things in there that you don't have time to do right now. And one of them is reading for me. Like I haven't, and it's hard to say. I don't like that phrase. I don't have the time. Like that's a terrible phrase. Normally, it's I have other priorities, right? Like it's just unless you're like locked up and you physically can't move. Like you have time. You're just choosing to do other things, and so I think that helps me a lot because it puts the control back in my hands. It's like it's not that I don't have time to read. This isn't something that's outside of my control. This is something that's within my control that I'm deprioritizing. And that's okay. That's okay. Like I went through phases years and years in a row where I was heavily reading like several hours a day, and that was good. And would you say I'm a reader? Yes. If someone were to ask me right now, am I a reader? I'd still probably say yes, but that it's okay. Not like it's okay to go through your phases with things. I recently stopped Olympic weightlifting, which is it's a strength sport, and I've just been doing more like just gym bro stuff, bodybuilding stuff, and but making that decision to let that part of me go was really difficult. Again, getting back to how we attach our identity to our hobbies. Like a lot of people, they attach their identity to being a reader. And so for them to not read, even for like a weekend or a vacation or a month, they get really busy. They get this shame where they feel bad about themselves because they haven't read, because reading is a part of their identity. So in their mind, so they're thinking, well, I'm not being me because I'm not doing the thing that is part of my identity. And I think we just need to throw that right out the window. I think we have to look at ourselves in a more like holistic, wholesome way, and to just see ourselves as what we really are, which like we're just very imperfect people aiming up. And that's it. And what that looks like, man, it changes. It changes on the seasons of your life. It changes on the seasons of the year. And that's okay. You don't have to be like this perfect person with these well-defined hobbies that you really excel at. No, you can just be someone that, okay, yeah, I read a lot last summer. I haven't read it all this winter. Man, I'll probably pick it up again in the spring. That's okay. It's really okay.
And I would say, from a philosophy of life, that is imperfectionism. If we think about that as like, just like we would stoicism or different things, existentialism, there's certain principles that you could say are kind of aligned with imperfectionism, where you just have certain like principles and practices and ways of seeing things to navigate the complexity, because we can keep adding and adding and adding things to our life till it's like it feels like we've got all these like spinning plates going everywhere. And it depends. Everybody's different, but even in the way of, say, being productive, we want to say that doing, we put in the category of productive, but then like stillness, silence, contemplation, we put in some sort of category of unproductive. Not everybody, but, we can be in this thing. And well, why do we do that? Well, because we, give some sort of value judgment to the productive, adding things to the to-do list, checking things off. instead of just asking, like, do I even need to do these things? It's like, what's wrong with just, I mean, same thing in terms of some of the more stillness practice. You think of meditation. Well, if I can't meditate every single day, I'm just not going to. If I can't journal every single night and really live and examine life, then I'm not going to. And I think that can get in the way of things. Like, who's to say that, 2 to 3 days a week of doing things, here and there when you have time is it is a good thing. And it's like, what gets in the way of that? What type of like worldviews and views and beliefs and things like that? Where did you come up with that narrative and that story behind, XYZ? And we all have to ask ourselves these questions. It's different for everybody. Because for some, maybe they're too much in the being stillness practices and they need to get, more into the doing, productive type of practices. Find that, philosophical mean that Aristotle was talking about. So it just depends on where we're at.
Yeah, it's the whole question of like, do I want to be a person that's a mile wide and an inch deep, or a mile deep and an inch wide? Like, there's no right or wrong answer here. Some people are really good at a lot of different things. Some people are the best at one thing. And I think like that's another thing that's worth knowing. Is like, if you look at people that are like top performers, like the best of the best, they're pretty unidimensional. Like, for the most part, they're very unidimensional. They're really good at that one thing. They could be like complete weirdos out in social settings. Like, they don't know how to do it themselves. They don't know how to handle group settings, but they're really excellent at this one little thing. And you know what? Both the person that's out partying and the person that's socially awkward, they're both people. They're both imperfect, and they're both worthy. Like, they're both worthy. They're both enough where they are. So it's just one of those things. I don't think there's anything wrong with, if you switch hobbies from time to time, even if you do it all the time. The only caveat being is that obviously if you're pursuing like worldly excellence, you have to stay consistent with something, and that can't be understated as well, which you mentioned. Like, obviously the more time you spend at something over years, you do get better at it. And so keep the consistency in mind. But at the same time, it's like, well, there's different seasons, man. Like, there's different seasons in life, and it's not a big deal to move on, to try something else. Like, if you find yourself getting bored with one of your hobbies, and I mean like a hobby, like the definition of a hobby, not like a side hustle, not like a job, or not like a business you're growing. I mean like a hobby. If you're getting bored with a hobby, it's kind of defeating the purpose of a hobby. like a hobby should really, by definition, be something that you don't have this perfectionist view on. It should be something that you're doing just for the heck of it, just for the fun of it. And yeah, there's room for both. There's room for striving for excellence, and there's room for, I'm just going to enjoy this.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. Like, being open to life, like however it may unfold. It's easy to get rigid. It's easy to, in a good way, take some agency and lead our lives. But then how do we do that where we don't quite have a death grip on, how life is actually supposed to unfold, and be open to what may be and what is.